everybody. My name is Catherine, and I'm from the Natural Mom Hub, and I'm here with Dr. Bridget Young of the newly dubbed website, babyformulaexpert.com, and she really is the baby formula expert. So, Bridget, welcome, and we're so happy to have you.
Oh, thanks, Catherine. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, great. Well, why don't we start by, if you could just tell us a little bit about how you got into this. Obviously, you've been studying this much longer than you've even been a parent. So how did your studies lead you to this place?
Well, that's a great long question. I have my PhD in perinatal nutrition, and I'm actually an assistant professor at the University of Colorado, where I do research mostly with breastfeeding moms, looking at breast milk composition and how that affects infant growth. But along the way, I'm also a certified lactation counselor. And so I've worked with loads and loads of different families and moms and babies. And of course, despite many moms' intentions to exclusively breastfeed, a lot of moms end up needing to supplement with formula. And so I actually put together a website ages ago to serve as a resource for my patients, because I kept getting the same questions over and over and over again about help, I need to supplement, how do I go about choosing a formula? My doctor says they're all the same. Is that true? That kind of a thing. So I started researching this for myself as a way to help my patients. And that was years ago, and it's just grown from there. And I still see the same questions over and over again, which was the birth of this website, to be a resource for parents who find themselves needing to feed formula and don't really know where to turn, because there's not that many great resources out there about how to choose a formula. There's a lot of resources explaining the difference between like a powdered versus a concentrated formula, but not the differences between actual ingredients. And that's what my goal is, to educate parents so that they feel confident. It takes some of the panic out of deciding on a formula so that they can focus on loving their baby and not have that indecision in the back of their head.
Sure. So really the format of the formula is not what we should be focusing on. It's actually the composition or what's in the formula.
Yeah, you nailed it. That was a much shorter way of saying it. Absolutely. And despite what people think, not all formulas are the same. And a lot of pediatricians do think all formulas are the same. And that's just because I work at a medical school and teach medical students. Nutrition is not taught in medical school, especially nutrition for quote unquote healthy term babies. So, they learn a lot about how to care for a baby in the NICU, but if your baby was relatively healthy when they were born, pediatricians learn nothing about the different ingredients that go into formula, and they aren't all the same. So I want to help parents be able to look at the label and make a decision for their own family based on what's actually in the formula about what would be best for their baby.
Mm-hmm. So you said something really interesting when we were getting ready before this, that most of the families you work with are 100% set on exclusively breastfeeding, mm-hmm. and that's their plan.
Yep. Yeah, that's absolutely true. So actually, I would say 100%, because as a certified lactation counselor, all the patients I come in contact initially are looking for help with breastfeeding issues, which we can also talk about if you'd like. But yeah, a lot of times we know this even just from the stats. Some families just decide that having a little bit or switching to formula altogether is better for them. Some women actually do need to supplement a little bit for the sake of their baby. And we talked about this, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I want to make a point that that's absolutely become very normal. And there's a lot of negative emotions that moms especially feel about this, especially if they were intending to exclusively breastfeed. There's a lot of guilt and even shame. They feel embarrassed to admit that they're feeding formula. And I just want to be sure that I'm publicly stating that that is so unnecessary. Yeah. You're doing such a good job caring for your baby. It is so hard, especially with a brand new baby, to just keep things pseudo-normal. You're so worried about your baby's health. And so if my goal is to help attempt to alleviate some of those negative emotions, and then also help them feel really confident that if they need to feed formula, they feel really good about the formula they're feeding, so that, again, all you need to do is just focus on being with your baby and not worry about all the rest of that unnecessary guilt.
Yeah, I think that's huge and such a relief to have permission to focus on what's important. I mean, food is food. Feeding our babies is our job. But
Yeah.
I think what I love about putting this hangout together is kind of differentiating the choices. And it's not like black or white. You know, there's a lot of shades in there, and there is probably a better, best with formula, right?
I do think so, yes.
Okay, so let's get into the meat. If we wanted people to take away one thing tonight about like the most key ingredient or component of formula, what is it and why?
Okay, well, I think if you're gonna just learn how to read one type of ingredient on the label, you want to be able to look at your formula and know what type of protein is in the formula. And the reason is, I told you, I think this is where parents can get the biggest bang for their buck, in that if they choose a formula, you know, a lot of times if baby gets a rash or you think it's causing spit up, most of the times, if that's true, the problem is going to be coming from the type of protein source. So parents should know what type it is, so that they just know, but also if they need to switch, they know what ingredient they're aiming to change when they switch brand. So it's the protein, and then we can delve into
what are the different choices that you might see out there?
Yeah, there's two different ways to characterize the protein in formula. The first one is what I call the source, and people pretty much know this. Like, you can have a cow's milk based formula, and on that ingredients, you'll either see just straight cow's milk protein or cow's milk concentrate, or you can have a soy-based formula. So most people know that you can have a soy or a milk-based formula. So I'm just going to go ahead and say I'm not a fan of soy-based formulas in general. If you're a mom and you're listening to this and you're feeding a soy formula and your baby is doing great, don't panic. Just stay with it. It's totally fine. If your baby's thriving, that's all that matters. But if you're thinking about switching or starting formula for the first time, I would suggest using a cow's milk-based formula. And then within that, cow's milk protein can be classified two different types, whey and casein. And breast milk has a lot more whey in it than casein. And so I like to have a formula that has additional whey added to it, because it's going to make that protein a little bit more like breast milk protein. And the extra whey will also help it empty the stomach faster, which may help if you have a little bit of a spit up issue in your house. So I like parents, if they're just starting out, to look for a formula that's cow's milk based and has additional whey. And you'll know it has additional whey because on the list of ingredients, it will say either whey protein or cow's milk protein, comma, whey protein, meaning it has both. So that right there was just a ton of information. And so, yeah, if you can look at the first line, that's the first way proteins are classified. And so look for cow's milk and look for whey.
Okay. Let me see if I'm savvy enough to bring up your beautiful new website. And
I have it open here too. Let me see if I can do the same thing.
Can you see your website? Maybe?
Yes, I'm in on the back end of it. So I can tell your readers, if you go to babyformulaexpert.com, I have a very long series of articles that really breaks down absolutely every component of formula. And so there's actually two articles just about protein. The first one really gives you all the information I just gave you, especially looking at casein versus whey. And the second protein article will tell you about hydrolyzed versus non-hydrolyzed protein, which we can talk about if you want, but that's a whole second layer of how to classify protein.
Okay.
You want to get into it?
Sure. Let's do it.
Okay. So the second way of looking at protein is, how is the protein processed? And I use that really scary word, hydrolyzed, which basically just means, this is a scientific term for chopped up. You know, in science, we like to have really long words so we sound smarter than we are. I'm convinced that's why. So hydrolyzed just literally means chopped up. So the proteins that are in the formula have been basically almost pre-digested a little bit for baby. So you can have a soy formula that's hydrolyzed, and you can have a cow's milk formula that's hydrolyzed. If your baby is under 6 months old, I do recommend you try to find a hydrolyzed formula, or it may say partially hydrolyzed on the ingredients. And that's because, again, those proteins are going to be smaller in size because they've been pre-digested, and that's much more similar to how breast milk provides protein. It provides very small proteins because we all know babies have sensitive stomachs. Things are prone to come back up and rush right on through. So a hydrolyzed protein is recommended to ease digestion, and also it helps prevent allergies in babies who are at risk for allergies. So if your family, actually the American Academy of Pediatrics does have a blanket recommendation that if you have any family history of allergy, especially food allergy, that you do choose a hydrolyzed protein, because that prevents a full big piece of cow's milk protein from being exposed to your baby, which is how potentially an allergy develops. So I say if your baby's under 6 months, I recommend a hydrolyzed protein, because if your baby's older than 6 months, you're probably starting to feed solids, and baby's intestines are much more mature at that point, so they're less likely to develop an allergy to begin with. So I'm less worried about it after 6 months. But go ahead.
No, you also mentioned just how sensitive baby stomachs really are. What are some of the reactions that a mom might see or parent might see that would make you think, okay, maybe the formula is responsible and maybe it's worth exploring something different?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a hard question because, you know, babies cry. We know this. I'm a mom. I totally hear it out there. Sometimes they're crying and you're like, it must be the formula, and you have no idea why. So I'll give you some answers, but my first answer is trust your intuition. You are the mom of that baby. You know what's best for that baby. If your gut tells you it's their food, it probably is. If your gut tells you it's something else, it's probably something else. But with that being said, one of the most common sort of adverse reactions would be excessive spit up. So all babies spit up, usually even after every meal, but I mean excessive, like half their feed, or if it's more projectile, like it's coming out more like vomit than just a little blah spit up. It was very visual there, but hopefully you know what I mean. If it's projecting across the room repetitively and it seems to make the baby uncomfortable, that type of spit up is an indication that perhaps something in the formula is irritating them, and we can go about trying to figure out what it is. The other one would be eczema, or any kind of skin rash that the baby seems to get if you've tried a new formula, or especially if they have a rash and then it seems irritated after they eat. That can be especially an indication that, like I mentioned, perhaps you don't have a hydrolyzed formula and those big proteins are causing a slight immune reaction that the baby will probably grow out of, don't worry. But if we can eliminate that discomfort for the baby in the meantime, we might as well. So those are the two big ones that are pretty indicative of the food. If they have constipation or gas, excessive gas, you know, that's causing them a lot of pain, that they're having trouble pass, that could be an indication that it's the formula. But those are also just very common baby symptoms as well that you have to just try to figure out if is it just positioning? Does the baby need to, you know, have his legs kicked, or is this happening with every single feed? Then it may indicate that, yeah, maybe it's time to try a new formula.
Okay. And as far as switching.
Okay. So I think probably every parent who feeds formula ends up switching at some point. And again, I see there is so much stress around this, and I totally understand. You don't want to see your baby in discomfort and you're just panicked. But the part that I hate is if you go to the grocery store and look in the aisle, so you make the bold and brave decision that you're going to switch formulas and you have no idea what to switch. You call a girlfriend and ask what she's feeding. You know, you don't know how to go about it. But I'm a scientist, and so I'm trying to help parents come up with a scientific way of doing it, which is why the first thing you need to know is what kind of protein are you feeding your baby, so you know how to switch it. There's other components in formula you can switch to, like the source of carbohydrate and the source of fat, and I talk about all of that on my website. But we'll just stick with formula as an example now. So for instance, one of the most common things I see is baby has intense eczema, right? And the creams aren't necessarily working, or the doctor wants to prescribe a really intense or even steroid cream, and a lot of parents don't want to put that on their child. So the first thing you can try is, again, to switch the protein source in formula. If you haven't been feeding a hydrolyzed formula, that would be the perfect thing to switch, to see if that's causing this kind of allergic reaction. And another really common example is, like I mentioned, really excessive spit up, or more like projectile vomit for the baby. I see that a lot in two cases. One where the child is being fed cow's milk based formula, but that doesn't have additional whey in it. So what that means is, by default, it's going to have more casein in it, and casein stays in the stomach longer. So for sure, it just has more of a chance to come back up. So sometimes switching those babies to a formula that has extra whey or 100% whey, for instance, like most of Gerber's cow's milk formulas are 100% whey. Sometimes just making that switch magically solves their problems. And we never know, is it just that the whey is making it leave the stomach faster, or was the casein causing an allergic or an irritating reaction? We'll never probably know the answer, but at the end of the day, moms don't really care as long as the problem is solved and baby's keeping their food down. So those are the two most common reactions I see, and the two biggest or most common fixes that solve it. So just know what type of protein you're feeding so that you can look at it and say, okay, I'm feeding this. What's a different option I can go with, so that you don't end up switching to a formula that's basically the same thing.
So what about actually executing the switch? Like, do you mix it to try, or is it one day you just try something new?
That is a great question. It depends if you're still breastfeeding at all. I recommend that you can totally just sort of cold turkey make the switch to formula, and act with your new formula. Act like it was the first time you were introducing formula. So the first time, mix it with some breast milk and give it to baby. And then, the next bottle or the next day, a little less breast milk. So, and then maybe the third day, a full bottle of formula, depending on how much you're giving. And then if you're 100% feeding formula, I would recommend at least one transition day where you're mixing them, but probably just one transition day is fine. And then the second piece of advice is the hardest, but you need to be a little patient. So if it is going to help, hopefully it will help overnight, but it may not, especially if the formula that was irritating baby's stomach has actually caused some legitimate irritation that needs to heal. So once you've switched 100% to your new formula, stick with it for at least a week before you make any decisions about this is better or this is worse. Because again, you may have some healing time that makes it seem like the formula is not any better, but really you just need to push through. And I know that is so hard. That's so hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's really helpful. And I belong to enough mom groups on Facebook where I see people are saying, I have an open container of this formula, an open container of this formula, an open container that they're trying to share with another mom and pass it on. For whatever reason, they're not using it. But I'm wondering if those are the moms who are switching to try to improve something and maybe aren't giving it the time it needs to take effect, or what could be going on with this sampling. But does that say anything to you? Like if you see somebody who's getting rid of like 5 opened containers of 5 different kinds of formula?
Yeah, well, it actually just makes me sad. I think, oh God, how much stress did they go through with every single one of those switches? That poor mother. So that's what it speaks to me, is that, again, if parents had a little more, and it's not parents' fault, if they had a little more education, I don't know where they're going to find it. Well, at my website, but it's not coming from their pediatrician. How do they know how to go about switching? So like when I hear that story, it just kind of breaks my heart a little bit, but makes me really excited for the opportunity that hopefully I have to help parents avoid that scenario, because formula is dang expensive too. 5 open containers, that's probably like $80 worth just wasted there. You know, we can all, it's a lot of shoes I could buy with $80. So it does, it makes me a little sad. And also I hope that their baby didn't have to go through 4 different sort of adverse reactions before they finally found the formula that really worked for their family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. So I've also heard about people doing homemade formulas and like recipes that are out there.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh, for the audience, Catherine and I did not plant this question, but I just wrote a post about this, but it's not published yet. Maybe I'll publish it right away, but I cannot endorse homemade formulas. Now, the full disclosure is I work for a medical institution, so there's certain things I just can't endorse, but homemade formulas make me extremely nervous for several reasons. The first and foremost is I obviously, like I said, I work at the medical school and I work with a lot of pediatricians, and several of them have shared with me patient case studies where, you know, a baby comes in with failure to thrive or some bizarre, well, they don't know what it is, but it ends up being a severe nutritional deficiency that's manifesting with, you know, severe skin problems and even muscle atrophy. So, and it ends up being that they're feeding homemade formula and missing some key component, some critical nutrient. And this again is not parents' fault. I can probably say that every parent I've ever met or seen online who feeds homemade formula is so devoted. It's a lot of work to make homemade formula. So these are not neglectful parents, but there's no way you can guarantee that the recipe you're using is 100% accurate. Mm-hmm. And then even if you are educated and you're a nutritionist and you think you can, there's no way you can guarantee that your ingredients are accurate, because a lot of these formulas, you have to add a supplement, like a B vitamin supplement or something, to get all the vitamins and minerals in the formula. And the FDA does not regulate supplements on the market in the US. So you could buy a bottle that says it has all these B vitamins in it, and no one is checking that. And it could also have dangerous fillers, that kind of a thing. So even if you're doing your due diligence, there's no way you can guarantee that your ingredients are truly what they say they are. And the last, well, not the last, but one of the other major ones is probably the most popular homemade formula recipes call for unpasteurized or raw cow's milk as the base. And this is
like the Weston Price.
The Weston Price, yeah. I didn't want to say, but yes, you're totally right. Yeah, I didn't want to say their website. Yeah, that's fine. Well, I didn't want to say it because they have a lot of really, I agree with a lot of their principles. They have they do a lot of great work, but I don't support their baby formulas at all. But yeah, they have a raw cow's milk formula. But unpasteurized means, yes, it may have some good, healthy probiotic bacteria, but it also is likely to have some bad bacteria that can make babies really sick. And remember, we all know this, babies' immune systems aren't fully developed. So even if you drank that raw milk, you could be fine, and it could make your baby devastatingly ill. So that's just a few of the reasons that homemade formulas, I really can't endorse. I just don't think they're worth the risk.
Mm-hmm. So you did mention the FDA.
Mm-hmm.
How does the FDA regulate formula that's the same way as everything else?
No, it's a little different, and I'm so glad you asked, because this is one of the reasons, or one of the really common things I hear from parents who say, well, aren't all formulas the same? I know the FDA regulates them. Well, the FDA has really minimal regulations on formula, and they're mostly based on safety, which is a great thing, and they do a great job. So the FDA has, which I'm trying to remember the number, I think it's only about 20 essential nutrients, so vitamins and minerals, that they say the formula has to contain this much iron in this range, this much vitamin A in this range. But that's only about, I don't know, 2/3 of the ingredients in formula. The rest are it's up to the formula company how much to put in or from what source. And the other thing that the FDA does is regulate safety, and that is regulated much more intensely than any other food on our market for adults. So they visit every single formula manufacturer in the country every single year. It's always an unplanned visit, so they do a secret drop-in to inspect for safety, and they also will pull formula from the shelves to test it to be sure it doesn't have any contamination, or you hear those horror stories about like bug pieces or something like that. So that's how the FDA finds those, and the FDA doesn't do that for any other food that adults eat. So formula really is, quote unquote, the safest food you can possibly buy, because it is really regulated for safety. But in terms of the ingredients, there's a lot of room for formula companies to go all different sorts of ways. And all the formula company has to do, if they add a new ingredient or change an ingredient, for instance, switching from lactose to corn syrup or cow's milk protein to soy protein, they just have to show that if a baby eats this food, he or she grows normally, meaning just they gain weight. They don't measure any other outcomes, like any developmental outcomes, any long-term risks, just that they gain weight. And so as a scientist who studies infant development, that unnerves me a little bit, that it's really bare minimum standards to get a new formula approved.
So let's talk about the marketing strategy of these formulas. I'm curious because some are being marketed as organic, some are being marketed as for breastfed babies even.
Yeah.
So can you shed some light on like just what is the spin that you can kind of cut through?
Yeah, I would say cut through all of it. You guys are smarter than to believe those claims. The one, I actually also have an article about this on my website. The one that cracks me up the most / makes me the most angry is formula for breastfed babies. Because by definition, baby formula is a replacement for breast milk. All formula is for initially breastfed babies, even if they were never breastfed. And also just the idea that a formula, or that a breastfed baby should be getting somehow a better formula or a different formula than a baby who's not breastfed, just makes me so angry. Yeah. So I think really all of the claims you see on the front are usually just bogus, just marketing. Like when you pick up a can of formula, you should flip it over to the back to read the list of ingredients, and that's the only thing you should care about. And hopefully, now that you've listened to this or you've read an article on my website, you'll be able to understand them. So like I talked about how a hydrolyzed protein is chopped up, and now you'll see a lot of hydrolyzed protein formulas are marketed as comfort proteins or easy digestion for baby. And you'll be able to flip over the can, oh, it's hydrolyzed. That's why they're saying that. But at the end of the day, doesn't every mom want her baby to have a comfort protein? You know, every mom wants a formula that soothes her baby. Every mom.
Let me choose the uncomfortable formula.
Yeah, like, I'll have the irritating formula. Wrap that up, please.
Yeah.
So, so that just, it just makes me so upset. Yeah, the front packaging is 100% marketing. And actually, one of the formulas I recommend, actually I can go ahead and say it. If you If your baby's under 6 months old, if you need to choose a name brand formula, because generic, I'm totally fine with generic, but it'll change with every location. So if I'm just sticking with name brand, the Gerber Good Start for supplementing, the one that they market for breastfed babies, is my first go-to formula. Even if you're not ever going to breastfeed. And that makes me really upset that a mom who chooses to exclusively formula feed may not think that's okay for her baby, even though I think it's probably one of the best options out there for her baby. So that's why I get really upset about it, that some of these formulas with what I think are better ingredients, parents may be dismissing based on this marketing. And so that's
just the name of it.
Exactly. And I don't blame them. That's what it says. So the marketing makes me totally irate, but now you guys are educated and you don't need to read the marketing.
So what about the organic thing?
Okay, so I get this question a lot, and I do have an article about it on my website as well if you want to go look. So when moms ask me, well, shouldn't I have an organic formula? I have a lame answer, and that's not the most important question you should be asking. So again, if your baby's under 6 months old, I would rather you choose a hydrolyzed protein instead of a non-hydrolyzed protein that's organic. And this is for a couple reasons. One, again, we know that the younger baby, the better a hydrolyzed protein is going to be. But also organic formulas aren't like buying organic produce. So when we make a formula, I mean, we've all seen formula, right? It's not a food. And if you read the ingredients, the ingredient list goes on and on and on and on. And of course, it has to have all these vitamins and minerals added. Even if they were originally organic, they have all the ingredients are so processed to get them down into a composition that a new baby can digest, that you've, in my opinion, you've lost some of the benefit of organic there to begin with. Because like, yes, maybe you started out with organic cow's milk, but that milk had to be so processed to get it down into a form that can go into formula in the first place that it may not be worth your money. If your baby's older than 6 months and you can afford an organic formula, I do think it's great because well, it does make sense. Organic is going to be better than non-organic if all other ingredients are equal. But there's very few organic formulas that have the protein sources that I recommended. And then there are some organic formulas that I think have straight up almost toxic ingredients. Like, I hate to throw some under the bus here, but Similac makes an organic formula, and the carbohydrate source in it, I believe, I hope I'm quoting this correctly, is 100% from corn syrup, or generated from corn syrup, has no lactose in it. So when I look at that, I think, well, I would actually rather have a baby drink a non-organic formula that's not made from corn syrup than this one. So it's a very complicated answer, and I totally understand. We all just want the best for our babies, and organic does sound better, but I think there's more important things to prioritize in the ingredients than organic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just not even... It seems like in other areas of our diet, organic or conventional is the conversation. And when it comes to formula, there are so many other criteria that outrank. So it's interesting. It's kind of a shift. It's not because you don't care. I mean, it's because you care so much, and you know that other things actually are going to impact your baby's health even more.
Right, exactly. And you hit the nail on the head that baby formula is not like any other food. And also, sometimes people forget to think about the fact that babies who are exclusively formula fed only drink formula. That's kind of a stupid thing to say, but it's like you only eating apples. You know, if you have just a small amount of pesticide in that apple, or, you know, one small thing off on that apple, if you just ate one, it wouldn't be a big deal. But if that's the only thing you're eating every day, 10 to 12 times a day, that adds up pretty quickly. So that's why these little ingredients in formula can make a really big difference, which is the whole point of this website, to be able to really look at the ingredients and be able to see what you think is best.
So I'm going to ask you one more like ingredient question, and then I'm going to ask you about one specific formula that one of our moms asked about.
Yeah.
But you mentioned some of these formulas have things that are not just things you want to avoid, but you called them toxic. So would you share with us like some of that, like, do not buy a formula that has this ingredient?
Yeah. Oh, you know, I definitely, but I'm gonna hesitate a little bit because again, if I say something and you go look at your formula and you see it, I do not want moms to panic. Again, if your baby is thriving and loving that formula and growing well on their growth curve, girl, stick with it. It's not worth it. And I did use the word toxic, but it's a little bit of an over exaggeration because again, the FDA wouldn't really allow people to put toxic things in formula, but there are, I'll downtone my language to say irritating. So some ingredients can be irritating to babies who are more sensitive. So let's see. One that's in, this is in most formulas and it's a little, so I'm going to back up and give another disclaimer. Everything I'm going to tell you now is a little bit controversial. What I've talked about before is really backed up by scientific research, and I would have no problem sharing to any patient. These ones are a little more controversial and the research isn't as clear. But if you've got a baby who's really fussy and you're desperate for something to change and you feel like you've tried everything, you can try to switch out some of these ingredients. One is carrageenan, which is, the fancy word is it's almost like a surfactant. It basically adds to the texture of formula, which is actually important because babies can't just drink watery food. I mean, brand new babies. So the texture and thickness is actually important. But carrageenan can be irritating to some babies. And I have had patients who have found a formula that removed carrageenan and it was like magic for their family. It did solve a lot of GI issues. Similar to that, this is kind of counterintuitive, but some of the DHA and ARA in formulas, these are those fatty acids that everybody's so jazzed about that come from fish oil.
Yeah.
Omega-3s, you got it. And they are. Omega-3s are wonderful nutrients and they're fantastic. But most of the omega-3s in formulas, the way that they're processed or extracted from, usually it's a bacteria or a yeast or an algae, can have chemical remnants that accompany the omega-3s that can be irritating, again, to very sensitive babies. The vast majority of babies are not going to be irritated by this. And again, this is controversial because I do want you to have a formula that has omega-3s in it. So this is sort of a very last resort. And then the last one that I'll mention is hardly toxic, but just something to be aware of is that I sort of hinted at it before. It's becoming really popular because it's very cheap to replace lactose, which is the natural carbohydrate in cow's milk and breast milk, with all different types of sugars and corn syrups that are very different from lactose. So if you see on the ingredients, it would be corn syrup, which most people recognize, corn syrup solids, maltodextrin. Those are all different versions of corn syrup, basically, or sometimes you'll see sucrose or glucose syrup solids. Sucrose is just table sugar, literally like a packet of sugar that you put in your coffee in formula. And glucose syrup solids is a new way of saying corn syrup, so people don't know that it's corn syrup. So this is in a lot of formulas, and we don't really know how this affects the infant.
So I'm a natural mom, so I feel comfortable saying this, but I've tasted breast milk and it's pretty sweet.
So have I. Yeah, it's fine.
I'm sure that most of us at some point, you know, you just want to know.
You're feeding it to your baby. You want to know what it tastes like.
So I'm sure that there's some reason, right, to make formula also have that same kind of flavor profile, right? I mean, sugar is something we digest and use for energy, so that makes sense to me. But you're saying lactose as compared to some of these other sources is easier for the baby to digest? We know that it is easier or better, or can you just elaborate on that a
Yeah,
little bit?
I can. So lactose is the sugar or the carbohydrate that's in breast milk, and it's digested very differently than all of these different corn sugars, which are going to be basically made up of glucose. So if you're a biochemistry nerd, you know what I'm talking about, but you don't need to be a biochemistry nerd. Lactose is digested more slowly, and it's not going to raise blood sugar as much, whereas glucose is absorbed very quickly and is going to have a bigger effect on baby's blood sugar, which is also going to have a bigger effect on baby's pancreas, which is the ultimate potential concern that I have.
So down the road, is this kind of connected to discussions about obesity?
It is. I want to be clear, there's no research linking it. We're actually studying this in our lab, but that is the concern, is that, you have this tiny baby pancreas that's very susceptible, and it's being asked to do a lot of work to produce a lot of insulin to handle all of this glucose coming in. And there has been some discussion, you mentioned, about the sweetness. Some of these formulas are sweeter than breast milk because they have these very sweet sugars in them. And there's some concern that you're encouraging baby to develop this taste for extremely sweet foods, which we can all appreciate when you try to introduce broccoli at 6 months and baby gives you that horrible face, that it could be making it harder for when that infant becomes a child for them to develop healthier taste profiles for some more bitter foods that are generally more healthy if they've been conditioned to this extremely potentially unnatural sweetness. Really early on. So that's the concern. And again, so I just want to say those aren't toxic. And if you are feeding a formula that has just corn syrup in it and baby's doing fine, don't panic. You're going to be totally fine. But if you're starting from the beginning, or if you have a baby that's really cranky and you're at your wit's end, those are some last resort things you can attempt to, get a new brand that changes that ingredient.
Okay, so I want to ask you about one specific formula because we did have this question come across.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the Honest Company's new formula?
Yeah, I'll give you a longer answer. This seems to be my normal, but in general, I love their formula. So their formula is organic, and it's one of the only 2 organic formulas that I do recommend. My caveat is that I recommend it if your baby is a little bit older, because it's not a hydrolyzed protein. So it is cow's milk based. I believe it has extra whey, or is 100% whey, but from cow's milk. So perfect, but it's not hydrolyzed. So if your baby is very young, and especially if you have a history of food allergies or allergic asthma, that kind of a thing, I'd prefer you to go with hydrolyzed protein. But if your baby's a little bit older, or if you've already introduced solid foods, like you've already introduced dairy and your baby doesn't have a problem with it, then the Honest Company is actually probably my #1 recommendation, because it is organic, but it does meet all the other criteria. And they do a really great job limiting some of those potential irritating things we just talked about. Now, there's one really huge thing I would have to point out with the Honest Company formula is one of the reasons it's organic and non-irritating is it has no DHA or ARA, so it has no extra omega-3s in it. But the Honest Company sells a supplement, and if you go on their website and you click on the formula, it will recommend, it's a little eyedropper bottle of omega-3s, and they recommend that you buy it separately so that you can add it to your formula. So I just want to point out that if you do choose the Honest Company formula, please do get the extra supplement to add to the formula. But that does increase the cost. So every family needs to weigh out whether or not they can afford to basically buy 2 things for every formula can.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for answering that. And I just have another question. So when new things come out on the market, how are you like going into the store and buying all these? Or you just hang out on the aisle and read the back of every?
Actually, I have totally done that. Yeah, that's actually very much what I do. So I always, hopefully I don't have to go to the store. I always try to go to the website, but some websites will not list the ingredients. And then I have to go into the store. And this really bothers me too when I have patients or now friends who live in different places and they want to know about a local generic formula. I'm like, well, I can't. And then the formula, that generic formula, doesn't list the ingredients on their website. I'm like, well, you're going to have to take a picture of the ingredients and send it to me.
So you do virtual consults, in other words.
Yeah, totally, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but yes, I do spend a fair amount of time. Every time I go to the grocery store, I actually do walk down the formula aisle just to be sure I'm kind of familiar with all the brands. And again, there's not a new one that's popped up that I haven't heard about yet because I don't want to be caught off guard.
So you're very up on this, and it's not just your job, it's sneaking into just like all of your grocery trips as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I also do have a 15-month-old and I'm 8 months pregnant. So it's also totally my life at the moment as well, which makes it easier to stay on top of things.
Yeah. Wow. Well, congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, we're very excited.
Wow, you're gonna be busy.
I'm gonna be insane. Yes, busy is a nice word for it, but yeah, that's very true.
So as we're kind of wrapping up, Bridget, let's talk about ways people can get more information, just learn more about you. Obviously, we want them to check out babyformulaexpert.com, where you do dive into many of these topics in much greater detail.
Yeah.
And then your contact information is there if people have specific questions or specific challenges they might be dealing with. Are you open to answering and working with some of our moms?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, babyformulaexpert.com is the website. And again, you can get total information overload. If you're an information junkie mom, it's going to be your heaven. But I will say I tried to have at the end of every article, there's the bullet point summary of I call it the, I have a newborn, what do I need to know summary. So if you don't have time, just scroll to the bottom and you can get the basics. So you can feel free to leave me a comment there and I'll get back to you. Or there's a contact page as well, which you can reach me through. And then my email address is drbridgetyoung@gmail.com. But if you leave if you use the contact form on the website, it'll forward right to my email, so I'll get it right away. And yeah, I'm very open to it. This is such a stressful time for moms, for a new baby, especially if you are intending to breastfeed. And again, like I said, if you make this brave decision to try formula, I want to help empower you to feel confident in your decision and to relieve some of that stress and be able to focus on your baby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, I think this has been so helpful and really illuminating in terms of what needs to go into the decision-making process.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's not like an urgent, like, my baby's not eating, I need a formula right now kind of thing.
Yeah. Which it normally is. I totally understand. If it is, you can click on my website, and I do have probably the most visited pages, like what is your formula recommendation page. So if you have to jump there, please do. And also, please, I should have said this at the beginning, check with your pediatrician, of course, before you change formulas. But also feel free, like I said, feel free to share my website with them because the chances of them knowing all this is actually very slim, and that's not their fault at all.
So in your day job, you're teaching medical students like what we've talked about today, or what are you kind of?
Actually, I wish. The medical students at the University of Colorado get more nutrition education than probably medical students probably at any other medical school in the United States. And in my opinion, it's still very inadequate. So I teach some of the nutrition lectures, but none of the ones around infant feeding. I have colleagues that do that have actually just been here longer. So they do those. But then again, most of those are focused on infants who are either born prematurely or have genetic issues that involve special diets to keep them healthy. Even though our institution, I think, gives the best nutrition education, it's still extremely lacking for healthy babies. I mean, they're taught breast is best, encouraged to breastfeed. And then if mom needs formula, tell her to go to the store or give her whatever you have from the rep, the last rep to
like the samples, the free samples.
Exactly. So, and that's still pretty standard in terms of the education that they get.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So this is really your like side project and what you have, putting your knowledge towards something that still it's not in the curriculum, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. So this website is totally my passion project. Again, it was born out of working with patients, getting the same questions over and over again, and just feeling for their panic and eagerness for this knowledge. So, and it's sneaking into my professional job too. We are beginning studies to look at, I just gave you a sneak preview about, these different sugars and how they may affect babies' development and blood sugars. So we are looking at that from a research perspective, but the website itself is, it's just totally me hoping to help empower. I keep saying mothers, but parents, of course, dads too, to empower them to feel confident about their feeding decisions, because they just beat themselves up so much. And you got so many other things to worry about. Let's cross this one off the list.
Other things we can beat ourselves up about.
Yeah, God, the list goes on and on. Let's just get rid of this one.
Yeah, and it will for like 20 years. So let's.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, it's a passion of mine.
Yeah. Well, I am feeling extremely honored that we got to host you and learn some of this from you. It's been really interesting. And I certainly didn't know. I mean, I knew there were a lot of competitors, but I hadn't really looked at like what does differentiate this. So it's a pleasure to kind of get this information out there. And I thank you for sharing it with Natural Mom Hub in our community. And just to wrap up again, you can learn more about Natural Mom Hub at naturalmomhub.com and Dr. Bridget Young at her website, babyformulaexpert.com. And I just want to say thank you again. This has been really, really fascinating. And I consider our second after bedtime Google Hangout to be a smashing success. So,
I totally agree. It was absolutely my pleasure.
All right. Take care, Bridget. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Catherine. Bye.
Bye.